Hey everyone, me Kevin here. In this video, we are going to learn a ton from Janet Yellen about what her position is on stimulus checks, unemployment, small business loans, EV infrastructure, EV charging, EV employment, cryptocurrencies, a little bit on cryptocurrencies. I mean, the future of interest rates, the future of inflation. Like, there's so much in this. This is a video that is worth watching if you want to know where Mr. Mnuchin's seat is potentially going, or very likely going. Joe Biden's pick for the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen. Let's tune in right away. Let's listen in right after I mentioned that you should use B-Day coupon code down below to join the programs linked down below. My birthday is at the end of this month. It is the 28th, so make sure to check that out down below. And folks, we will see you in this video. And remember, all of those courses do come with access to my private live streams where you can ask me questions on building your wealth, and we look at the market every single day the market is open. Let's go.
When economists look back on the pandemic, I expect they'll conclude that Congress's actions averted a lot of suffering. But more must be done. Economists don't always agree, but I think there is a consensus now. Without further action, we risk a longer, more painful recession now and longer-term scarring of the economy later.
This is a very, very similar train of thinking as what Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell says. Now, keep in mind, Janet Yellen used to be the Federal Reserve Chairwoman before Jerome Powell, so it's not a surprise that we're seeing somebody basically who was at the Fed going, we need to keep the money printer rolling, which is basically what Jerome Powell's saying now because we want to avoid those longer-term scars, now taking a seat of power in the Treasury Department, which has direct access to telling Biden, yo, let's do the bigger checks. Let's do more stimulus checks. This is potentially powerful. Let's keep listening to what she says.
Pandemic has caused widespread devastation. Whole industries have paused their work. 18 million unemployment insurance claims are being paid every week. Food bank shelves are going empty. The damage has been sweeping. And as the president-elect said last Thursday, our response must be too. Over the next few months, we're going to need more aid to distribute the vaccine, to reopen schools, to help states keep firefighters and teachers on the job. We'll need more funding to make sure unemployment insurance checks still go out, and to help families who are at risk of going hungry or losing the roof over their heads. Neither the president-elect nor I proposed this relief package without an appreciation for the country's debt burden. But right now, with interest rates at historic lows, the smartest thing we can do is act big. In the long run, I believe the benefits will far outweigh the costs, especially if we care about helping people.
That's big right there. That's big. She's saying, look, folks, rates are so low. This is exactly what the Fed is saying. We have to spend big now to help people. So then Janet Yellen briefly talks about the state and local tax deduction, the SALT tax limits. She says she's planning to study the impacts of those over the last few years. We'll see. No real opinion one way or another. But now she talks more about what she thinks about stimulus going forward, especially like unemployment benefits. Let's take a listen.
I think relief that we provide to those who are in the greatest need and to small businesses have the best chance of providing both relief to those who've been so badly affected by the pandemic and by creating a great deal of spending per dollar spent, they'll create jobs throughout the economy, having the biggest bang for the buck. So I see, for example, extended unemployment insurance, SNAP benefits, and so forth as having a very large buck. Of course, in a way, the biggest bang per buck comes from the money we spend on public health to make sure that we have widespread vaccinations quickly so schools can reopen and we can get past the pandemic and reopen businesses and the economy safely and avoid scarring that will occur if there's permanent job loss.
So that section there was pretty important, what she said. Janet Yellen, coming in as a Treasury Secretary, is going to be hooking up basically with Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell, we know, is a big crank the money printer, more fiscal stimulus, let's get the money flowing, help the people who need help. Janet Yellen, who's taking over Steve Mnuchin's job, she just said her plan is, look, I believe the biggest bang for our buck is spending money on small businesses and sending relief to the people who need it the most, aka stimulus checks that are targeted and other benefits such as SNAP food programs and unemployment. Because when those people spend money, they will create jobs. That's a big statement. Now, she does then make this sort of umbrella argument but of course, we have to make sure we get vaccines as well. But these are high priority items to basically keep spending money on. So stimulus could be here under a Yellen Biden administration for quite a while to come. Let's go ahead and keep listening. Janet talks a little bit about China here, which if you're investing in the stock market, you're going to want to be careful because based on some of the things she says here, we want to see how aggressive the Biden administration is going to be towards companies like Xpeng and NIO. So let's be careful, but let's listen in here.
Creating a more competitive economy in research and development. We need to take on China's abusive, unfair, and illegal practices. China's undercutting American companies by dumping products, erecting trade barriers, and giving illegal subsidies to corporations. It's been stealing intellectual property and engaging in practices that give it an unfair technological advantage, including forced technology transfers. And these practices, including China's low labor and environmental standards, are practices that we're prepared to use the full array of tools to address. Of course, it is important over time.
That's big here, right? I mean, she's basically saying, hey, look, we have climate priorities, and if China doesn't play along, and if they're going to be abusive with economic practices, hey, we're going to use whatever tools on our belt to fight that. Now Janet's going to talk about the corporate tax rate. This should be interesting. I'll see what she says.
In my years at the Fed and look forward to a very productive working relationship going forward. On the 2017 tax cuts, the president has said that eventually, as part of a larger package that would include significant spending and investment proposals, but not now, while the pandemic is really depressing the economy, that he would want to repeal parts of the 2017 tax cuts that benefited the highest income Americans and large companies. And he wants to reverse the law's incentives to offshore operations and profits. But he's been very clear that he does not support a complete repeal of the 2017 tax law. There are some areas, though, that he would amend. For example, a provision in that law had the unfortunate byproduct of rewarding companies for moving their operations offshore, and the president would reverse that. We look forward to actively working with other countries through the OECD negotiations on taxes on multinational corporations to try to stop what has been a destructive global race to the bottom on corporate taxation. And in that context, we would assure the competitiveness of American corporations, even with a somewhat higher corporate tax.
Basically, Janet Yellen said, hey, look, we're not going to get rid of the 2017 tax law that Trump passed, but there are some crappy things within it that we will change. And yeah, we are going to look into potentially raising the corporate tax rate, but we want to do so in a way that American companies will still be competitive by operating in America. So they're balancing this out, realizing that, yeah, America does have one of the highest corporate tax rates. Let's keep going.
Climate change is a critical problem facing the country, and President-elect Biden is committed to a wide range of policies to address it, and in the process, making sure that in doing that, we create good jobs for American workers. As you've suggested, it's important that we make things in America. And electric vehicles are a very important way of both creating good jobs and addressing climate change. The president-elect is supportive of restoring full incentives for electric vehicles. He wants to ensure a robust electric vehicle market, and on top of that, that will involve building infrastructure and making sure that our workers have the skills that are needed to succeed in electric vehicles.
Okay, that's huge. That's huge. That's so freaking huge right here. Whoa, that is huge for electric vehicles. She's basically saying Biden not only wants to fully restore electric vehicle credits, but Biden wants to push electric vehicle infrastructure, which we did already know that. He's already studying and researching electric vehicles to grid. He's already pushing for additional charging infrastructure. But take it a step further, pushing to educate people to understand how to work on electric vehicles. Folks, that is insane. You gotta be in electric vehicles. It's a little bit of a balance so far in this video here, and I'm a little bit torn because I'm obviously a huge investor in Tesla. This morning I invested in CCIV, the rumored Lucid partnership or merger. You should watch that video if you haven't yet. Extremely detailed video. I tried hitting everything. Probably took me 2 days to research. Actually did. But anyway, I also have exposure to Chinese EV companies, Xpeng and NIO. So that sort of more hawkish approach against China will be very interesting to see how that balances out. Maybe that means throwing more money into the homegrown EVs, right? As I said in the Lucid video, pick the NIO of America. All right, let's keep going. Okay, now John Thune, Republican, one of the big shot Republicans, who's generally like, no more stimulus, no more spending, too much. Okay, I don't know where this accent's going, but he now basically went off and said, look, I know Democrats are like, hey, look, if you do more spending, then we're going to get more revenues, then we'll get more taxation, and interest rates are low, like there's no reason not to spend, but we're concerned, we have a debt problem, we're going too high into debt. What do you think? Let's listen.
Senator, I agree with you that it's essential that we put the federal budget on a path that's sustainable, and that we're responsible and make sure that what we do with respect to deficits and debt leave future generations better off. But the most important thing, in my view, that we can do today to put us on a path of fiscal sustainability is to defeat the pandemic, to provide relief to American people, and then to make long-term investments that will help the economy grow and benefit future generations. To avoid doing what we need to do now to address the pandemic and the economic damage that it's causing, would likely leave us in a worse place fiscally and with respect to our debt situation than taking the steps that are necessary in doing that through deficit finance. We really have to worry about scarring of due to this pandemic of workers and the loss of small businesses that can really harm the long-run potential productivity of our economy and leave us with long-run problems that would make it difficult to get back on the growth path that we were on. And it's really critically important to provide this relief now, and I believe it would be a false economy to stint. But over the longer term, I would agree with you that the long-term fiscal trajectory is a cause for concern. It's something we will eventually need to attend to, but it's also important for America to invest in our infrastructure, invest in our workers, invest in R&D, the things that make our economy grow faster and make it more competitive, and It's important to remember that we're in a very low interest rate environment. And that's something that existed before the pandemic hit. Interest rates were low even before the financial crisis of 2008. This has been a trend in developed economies. You can see it across the developed world, and it represents structural shifts that are likely to be with us a long time. So although the debt to GDP ratio has increased, it's important to note that the interest burden of the debt, interest as a share of GDP, is no higher now than it was before the financial crisis in 2008, in spite of the fact that our debt has escalated. And of course, interest rates can increase. Eventually, we have to make sure that primary deficits in the budget are sufficiently small, that we're on a sustainable path. But right now, our challenge is to get America back to work and to defeat the pandemic.
That's huge. I mean, she got railed on by John Thune here. John Thune went off on this idea that, well, yeah, I know rates are low, but the debt is still ridiculously high. And she basically picked him apart and said, look, now is not the time to worry about the debt. Now is the time to get people back to work, to invest in infrastructure, the climate, to get people jobs, to get people educated for those jobs, like the electric vehicle jobs that we had talked about. And she gave a little bit of a warning here, even for Bitcoin folks, right? Because remember, if you're investing in Bitcoin, frequently you're investing in Bitcoin as a hedge to inflation. That, oh my gosh, this big inflation's coming. That's it. Bitcoin is an opportunity to invest as a hedge against inflation. That's not the only reason to invest in Bitcoin. So this is not a slam at Bitcoin. It's just a warning against one of the reasons. For investing in Bitcoin. And this is and remember, I have some Bitcoin too, but this is also Janet Yellen's approach, right? So this is very different from what a lot of people believe who do invest in cryptocurrencies. But anyway, Janet Yellen's basically saying, look, there's so many structural shifts in our economy that it's so normal for us to have lower interest rates long term, that interest rates may never go back up to where they used to be. Sure, we'll slowly get them back to 2% as inflation goes back to 2%, but for right now, now's the time to spend money, more relief, more support for people. Now is not the time to worry about the national debt. And sure, the national debt number might be high, but relative in terms of interest payments, it's super low compared to our GDP, compared to our income. Let's keep going. Now she's going to touch on unfair trade again. Really important again for the China thing. Her answer? Pretty good. Let's see what you think.
We should try to address unfair trade practices, and the best way to do that is to work with our allies rather than unilaterally. And when the unfair practices have to do with things like stealing intellectual property and engaging in forced technology transfer, or subsidies that provide an unfair technological advantage, I think we should focus directly on those practices and work with our allies to make sure that they're addressed.
So that's good. That's better than potentially that rashness or suddenness that sometimes we would get from the Trump administration versus China if you are investing in Chinese companies. Let's keep going. Now Janet's going to talk about raising the minimum wage. Let's listen.
Their communities functioning, and sometimes even working multiple jobs, are their lives on the line, to $15 an hour, because President-elect Biden has proposed raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, because right now we have millions of American workers who are putting their lives on the line to keep their communities functioning, and sometimes even working multiple jobs, aren't earning enough to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. And they're suffering in countless ways, especially during this pandemic, and really struggling to get by. And raising the minimum wage would really help many of those workers. And that's the reason for doing it. Now, in terms of potential job loss, there's now a large economics literature on this, and much of it suggests that the raising minimum wages, this is what researchers often look at what happens when one state raises its minimum wage and a neighboring state leaves it alone to see how businesses fare in the two different places with different treatments. And the findings are that the job loss is very minimal, if anything. So
That's a big statement here. So not only is she encouraging a raising of the minimum wage, but she's referencing that when similar areas have had different minimum wage policies, there haven't been those job losses, because the first thing that businesses do is they scream as soon as they hear bigger minimum wage or greater minimum wage. The first thing people scream is, that's it, we're laying people off. She's saying that's not really what's happening. Let's keep listening.
So I think that the likely impact on jobs is minimal. That's my reading of the research. And of course, I agree with you, small businesses are struggling, and it's critical to help those businesses. I appreciate the PPP package in the recently passed bill. I pledge that we will do everything we possibly can to get that money out to struggling businesses effectively. It is critically important to help those businesses.
Now we're going to hear some talk about targeted stimulus. Let's listen to it.
Maybe a little bit better or differently than is proposed in this relief package from the administration, incoming administration. How can we target it better?
Yeah, I mean, we need to look at how to target it. It needs to go to the businesses that are most at risk, small businesses, particularly businesses in low and moderate income areas that receive less than a proportionate share of PPP relief in the first round of PPP aid. So we need to target small business relief at those most vulnerable businesses. We need to make sure that people aren't going hungry in America, that they can put food on the table, that they're not losing their homes and ending up out on the street because of evictions. We really need to address those forms of suffering, and I think we shouldn't compromise on it. And if we don't do so, that suffering and the loss of spending it will cause other people to lose jobs and permanent scarring that will harm the economy over the longer term.
All right, thanks.
Big statement there. I mean, huge statement basically saying, hey, look, if we don't help small businesses and we don't keep relief going to the people who need it, that is going to lead to more not only scarring for those folks, which is a point she reiterated from earlier, but it will also hurt the economy broadly because people will be able to spend less, and that's going to hurt the big boys too, aka, and now I'm interjecting here, but that's going to hurt the Apple, the Amazon, the Teslas, the Facebooks, right? The big companies as well.
As you know, millions of people have lost their jobs. In many cases, employers are out of business. And the folks that have lost their jobs don't have the skills to be able to do the jobs that are out there being going untaken. We've heard some ideas of late how to address that. And one is to use our community college systems across the country to provide not the ability to get a 2-year degree, but the ability to get, in some cases, just train your certificate for a job that needs to be done.
Dude, that is so brilliant. That is a really good idea. Right now, this particular individual is saying, hey, what about using our community colleges rather than giving people a 2-year degree that you're not going to go anywhere with, really, because, it's like a step to get the 4-year degree, with the exception of certain cases. But why not just provide, like, technical degrees? And we already do some of this, like nursing programs, but also I'm guessing, like, hey, you want to be an automotive engineer? Hey, let's get you a job at Google. Let's get you a job at Apple, Tesla, Facebook, whatever. Let's get you that technical degree. Very good question here. This is something I've proposed in my California Sucks videos in terms of what California should do. This is smart. Let's listen to the answer.
Yes.
Think out loud about that.
I'm strongly supportive of supporting the community college system. I think it provides a wide range of very valuable training. In some cases, helping people to go on to college, but in many cases, providing training, as you indicated, to workers who've lost their jobs, who need new skills, a new credential to be able to move into jobs that are available in expanding sectors. And I think investing in that system, making sure it's available to anybody who needs it and can benefit from it is really important.
Okay, so then Janet Yellen is asked about the $175 million in small business loans. She didn't give us really good detail in terms of how we would get that or whatever, but now she's going to get asked, what about the $1,400 stimulus checks? Is that really targeted relief? Let's listen in.
Well, I believe that in the president-elect's proposal, it would go to individuals earning $75,000 or less, or couples earning less than $150,000 or less. Some families presumably don't greatly need the money, but there are many families who are under stress, who people have had to drop out of the labor force, aren't receiving unemployment.
Can I ask you on that? I only have 5 minutes, but on the other hand, the unemployment insurance that is going out there would be a very directed relief for those who've had to drop out of the workforce. Totally accept that. So, but it seems like the $1,400 on top of the unemployment and on top of some of the other, the rent relief, for example, seems to be less targeted. And I go back there because targeted keeps on coming up.
Well, it is less targeted, but there are many families that are bearing exceptional financial burdens that are not addressed by unemployment compensation. People who've had to drop out of the labor force because their children are out of school, who simply can't participate because they need to take care of family priorities.
Can I interrupt again? Just because I don't mean to be rude, I only have 5 minutes, and now I only have 2.5. There's also money for education.
Oh, the guy's getting a little impatient. But very interesting. What basically Jen Yellen here is not giving him the answer that he wants. He wants to hear, yeah, you know what, maybe the checks do need to be more targeted. She just responded and said, yeah, look, unemployment is nicely targeted, but there's some people who don't get unemployment who need the money. And stimulus checks are a great way to do that. She's very supportive of the stimulus checks here. He's not liking that answer.
One of the things we suggested in our bill, I think Senator Brown talked a little bit about this, was the idea that the Treasury Secretary could set up monthly advanced child tax credit payments. I wonder, just in the last seconds that I have, whether you agree that monthly payments would aid in smoothing families' incomes and spending levels over the course of the year, better helping them make ends meet during this difficult time.
I agree. These families have serious liquidity issues, and not having to wait until tax day to receive these payments would be very beneficial. So I would certainly explore with the IRS if it's possible to make these available in advance on a monthly basis.
Quick explanation on what this is. So when you have children, you get a child tax credit. Right now, that's $2,000 a year. Under Biden's plan, that could go up to $3,000 or $3,600, depending on the age of the child. 0 to 5 is $3,600, and 6 to 17 is $3,000 per child. Up to, of course, income thresholds, which I think is $200,000 for single and $400,000 for married filing jointly. So if you're under that income, you would get that child tax credit per child. Having an advance of that is actually pretty neat. Basically, what it would do is it would say, okay, you get $3,600 per child. Let's say you have 2 children. So ordinarily, you would get an extra tax refund of $7,200 per year under that type of credit. Right now, that might only be $4,000. This would be $7,600, so it'd be more. Then they take that $7,600, divide it by 12, and boom, you're getting a $633 check a month instead of one lump sum at the end of the year. That's generally actually seen as much better, because if you get a lump sum, you're more likely, or tentatively, you're more likely to struggle through the rest of the year, and then you get this big lump sum, and then oftentimes what happens is people load up a credit card, then they pay off the credit card, and you get into this vicious cycle of never being able to properly budget or get ahead. Whereas if you had a monthly distribution, you could budget a lot more rather than waiting for that big lump sum day to come up. It's also one of the reasons why taking a tax return can sometimes, or taking a tax refund can sometimes not be as ideal. You're almost better off increasing or changing your withholdings so that you're getting less of a tax refund, and you're getting that more in your pay every single time you get paid, every 2 weeks or every month or whenever you get paid. All right, let's keep going. Now she's going to say, what's more of a priority, raising taxes or stimulus?
Senator, the focus right now is on providing relief and on helping families keep a roof over their head and food on the table, and not on raising taxes. But longer term, I think it's important to, the Biden program of Build Back Better, investing in people, investing in infrastructure, investing in research and development, in manufacturing, and things that will create good jobs and make our economy more productive. We need to think about taxes in the context of a package that aims to do those things. And to the extent that financing is required for these very valuable investments, I believe it should come in a fair way. Taxes, collections relative to the economy have declined over time, and although the corporate tax cuts, I think, did improve the competitiveness of American businesses, and President-elect Biden is not proposing to raise the corporate tax to the level before that act. It's very important that corporations and wealthy individuals pay their fair share. And the proposals that he will make will be in the context of an overall package that's very beneficial to the economy. And I think working in the context of the OECD negotiations on global taxation, we have much greater leverage to keep our firms, American firms, competitive if we avoid a race to the bottom in corporate taxation.
Okay, so basically, hey, look, we're going to look at taxes as they relate to the infrastructure packages that we do. Yeah, we're going to look at the corporate tax rate as well, but right now, the focus is relief. Help people, provide relief, and if we need to deficit finance, aka deficit spend, aka print money, and raise the debt, then that's what we're going to do. Let's keep going. Now here, Janet Yellen tells us the difference, in her opinion, between how we should act in a short term versus long term. Some of it sounds familiar, but it's also very interesting from her POV on interest rates and what they're going to do going forward. Let's take a look.
And that's very important for us to focus on. I pledge to do that. Right now, short term, I feel that we can afford what it takes to get the economy back on its feet, to get us through the pandemic, and to relieve the burdens that it's placing on households and small businesses. And research from other countries suggests that often spending money to address a weak economy ends up creating a lower debt burden in the long run than failing to provide that support. So that will be my focus in the short run, is getting the economy back on its feet. But longer run, there are challenges in achieving fiscal sustainability. We have to make sure ultimately the deficits that we run, if we do that, are consistent with fiscal sustainability. The world has changed. I believe the future is likely to bring low interest rates for a long time, but of course it is a risk that interest rates can rise, and we need to consider that risk as well in crafting a sustainable and responsible policy.
So now Janet Yellen talks about cryptocurrency and potential terrorist financing related to cryptocurrencies. Let's listen into what she says.
Cryptocurrencies are a particular concern. I think many are used, at least in a transactions sense, mainly for illicit financing. And I think we really need to examine ways in which we can curtail their use and make sure that anti-money laundering doesn't occur through those channels.
I don't know about you, but I pretty much just concluded that Janet Yellen is basically the spitting image of Jerome Powell. That means we have gotten rid of Steve Mnuchin, who's much more fiscally conservative and checking those pockets to make sure we're not printing too much of that money. We don't want to have too much support. We have gotten rid of that. And now we have another J. Powell in, well, now the government's position, and this is the Treasury Secretary, or potentially going to. This is all part of her confirmation hearing. I personally feel like I got a lot of insight into how she thinks. And like I said, it's very, very similar to Jerome Powell. I mean, we've got some great insights here on her future opinion on interest rates. When does she think rates are going to go up? Basically, she thinks long term we're going to see low rates. She's not seeing that high inflation coming. Which is definitely something to consider if you are investing in a way that is fearful of high inflation in the long term. That instead we might be seeing this sort of trend downwards in interest rates over the long term. And that we need to spend what we need to. Many other insights in this. Super informative. If you found this helpful, consider sharing this. Make sure to subscribe, and folks, we'll see you in the next video.